Ronald Alberto Zendajes from Nevada entered the front office of Motel 6 in a town called Sparks in Nevada, and he did so with a chainsaw. We see this on the footage. Once inside, he used the chainsaw to cut down a door so that he could enter an employee-only zone. He managed to get through that door with the use of the chainsaw. He started yelling at staff. They obviously fled, and the general manager called 911. Two officers responded to the 911 distress call. They arrived shortly thereafter, at which point the chainsaw-wielding nutbag Ronald Alberto Zendajes was sat in his car in the parking lot. The officers approached him, they identified themselves, and they ordered the nutbag to stop the vehicle and show his hands. The nutbag decided otherwise. He completely ignored the officers. He rapidly reversed and he drove out of the parking lot. He subsequently crashed the car. Officers went after him again, ordered him to get out of the vehicle. Perhaps they didn't use as polite language as I just have. And the chainsaw-wielding nutbag once more ignored the officers. He reversed the vehicle and crashed once more. Again, officers approached the vehicle, ordered the nutbag to leave the vehicle, but he again refused, and ultimately that led to the officers shooting the nutbag in question, which led to his death. I'm not 100% sure if he died on the scene. The article doesn't quite tell us, so I presume he did. And I'll be honest, I won't be shedding a tear. Perhaps that displays my lack of empathy, certainly for this guy. This is an utter nutbag. We're told that he was seemingly drunk at the time. Earlier in the evening, he was behaving rudely and aggressively towards the motel staff. He had already had a verbal altercation with the staff. He had displayed some violent acts, but then he left. The staff probably felt quite relieved by that, but not until he came back with a fucking chainsaw. So what the heck led this scumbag to act like this, to get a chainsaw and to use it to enter into the employee-only zone within the motel? Why would he do that? We don't really know why. We're not told, but my guess would be that it was in regards to one trivial matter or other. Perhaps he'd been overcharged. They said he drank half a dozen bottles from the minibar, maybe. I don't know. We don't know. But it certainly wouldn't have been any level of justification for getting a chainsaw and then forcing one's way into the employee-only zone, scaring all of the staff, threatening all of the staff. And then, of course, he refuses to cooperate with the police. He drives off, crashes, drives off again, crashes again. Drunk, continues to refuse to comply. Officers shoot him. He dies. I don't know, America. Perhaps you guys should realize that when officers tell you to do something, it's probably a good idea to do it. I'm quite pro-authority. I don't believe in an absolute police state, but we just see time and time again, if you don't comply with United States officers, they will get to the point that they will shoot. Happens time and time again, and I don't blame them. Certainly I don't blame them fully. They're at risk. They don't know what they're dealing with. The nutbag here had already threatened people with a chainsaw. The officers didn't know what other weapons that he might have had in the vehicle. Of course they needed to protect themselves. He'd crashed the car twice, showing a complete willingness to not cooperate. We don't know the finer details, but it seems reasonable to me on the surface of things for the officers to have decided that they were right to shoot. So is there anything we can learn from this? No, not a great deal. We don't know too much about the chainsaw-wielding nutbag Ronald Alberto Zendajes. We don't know about his criminal history. We don't know about his mental health history. We're told that he was drunk. Certainly he was disorderly, but that's all we know. So my question is, what the heck leads someone who seems to be likely to be a contributory member of society, perhaps a generally law-abiding citizen, but he has snapped. He has thrown one heck of a hissy fit, upset about some triviality or other, no doubt. And he feels that entitled to get a chainsaw, to use it to break into a certain part of the motel, scaring the bejesus out of the staff. Then thankfully, he chose not to harm any of the staff members. So there is the blessing. He stopped himself from doing that. So he went off to the car to have a little sulk to himself, failed to comply with the officer's instructions, tried to flee the scene, crashed, tried to flee again, crashed, and then shot. So he's a very silly boy, and I'm using too trivial language, I realize that. But what would make someone do this? It's concerning, really. Are our neighbors, is the bloke you know down the road going to be doing this too? Have a couple of drinks too many, then start attacking people for no good reason, end up getting shot and killed? Are we going to see this more and more often? Perhaps I'm being silly there, but I do sense that perhaps we will be, for whatever reasons. Perhaps people are just overly stressed, perhaps due to financial difficulties, perhaps due to the state of the world. Our belief, maybe not your belief, but a lot of people's belief that we're perhaps at the brink of World War III, that we see so much sadness. We watch true crime videos. We see what's happening in the Ukraine and in Israel and Palestine. If you follow politics, if you're a Democrat or a Republican in America, you know how corrupt both parties are. You've seen it. Corrupt, inept, whichever way you want to consider it, but we can't hold too much faith in them, can we? Have any of them, any of the leaders of the Western nations, protected the citizens adequately? No. Living costs skyrocketing, economy plunging, immigration out of control, failing health systems, failing infrastructure, etc., etc., etc. Shouldn't go on this tangent, to be honest. But what's my point? My point is, a lot of people are unhappy out there in the world. A lot of people are extremely stressed, and maybe that's what's leading to otherwise so-called normal people taking reckless, violent action. But that's all the information that we have. Again, it is an absolute blessing that none of the employees were hurt. Let's hope that they're able to overcome the trauma that they would have suffered. I'll say condolences to the family and friends of the chainsaw-wielding nutbag, Ronald Alberto Zendajes. The family and friends perhaps knew him as a good man. We don't know. Perhaps they didn't. Perhaps they knew he was a fucking nutbag. Perhaps he does have a criminal history. But we're not told that, so I have some level of presumption that he perhaps was mostly a half-decent person, just not on this occasion. So perhaps they've lost a friend, a father, a brother, a son. So full condolences to family and friends that have been touched by the killing of Ronald Alberto Zendajes. But in my opinion, from the information that I've read through, just from this one article, so, you know, it's pretty limited at the end of the day, but I certainly would agree that the shooting of this chainsaw-wielding nutbag was justified. He had a chainsaw, he had threatened staff of a motel, he tried to flee the scene, he had crashed, he wasn't complying with the officers. I don't know the full details, but it seems kind of reasonable that they were put into a position where they had no other choice but to shoot, and bullets kill people. We know that by now. So criminals, if you want to live, if you don't want to be shot, you know, comply. Perhaps he was too inebriated, perhaps he was too entitled, his head was shoved too far up his own rear end for him to realize the danger that he was in, the trouble that he was in. Perhaps he wanted it, perhaps he wanted to be shot. Perhaps in that moment at least, he decided, you know what, I don't want to carry on, and these officers can end it for me. Perhaps he had that full thought, perhaps he just had a feeling of that, a fleeting moment's worth, due to anger, due to frustration, whatever it happens to be, but seemingly he allowed himself to create the situation from nothing, continue with it until the point that it took his life. So I don't feel too much sympathy for him as an individual. I guess I've rambled a little bit too much, so I'll wrap things up at this point. If you appreciate the coverage, please do like, comment, subscribe, share the video as you see fit. If you're in a position to consider joining my memberships, please do. Perhaps you're able to drop a super thanks, but it's perfectly fine if you're not able to do either. I'll thank you for your time and take care.